Hello guys, welcome to PhiloNest. The USA didn't just start as a country, it started as an idea, a radical, dangerous, world-shifting idea. It began with rebellion not just against a king, but against centuries of tradition. When 13 colonies declared independence in 1776, they weren't just breaking away from Britain. They were stepping into the unknown. They said, no more inherited power, no more rule by bloodline, no more systems that tell a person who they're allowed to be. They put it in writing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was a philosophical earthquake. Most of the world at the time believed in hierarchy, in divine rule, in fixed class and fate. But the USA said, no. The individual matters more than the crown. Your conscience matters more than your bloodline. You are not born to serve, you are born to choose. And yet, from the very beginning, contradiction lived inside the USA. The same men who wrote about freedom also owned slaves. The same system that claimed equality denied women the right to vote, pushed native people off their land, and counted enslaved humans as fractions in the census. The USA was built on an idea, but it was also built on a paradox. And that paradox is at the center of its philosophy. How do you fight for freedom while holding chains? How do you dream of equality while enforcing division? The founders were not perfect, but they lit a fuse. They opened a door. They created a framework that, despite its flaws, allowed future generations to ask deeper questions and demand real answers. The USA grew quickly. It expanded westward, reaching into wild lands, building cities, railroads, factories, power. It invented, it industrialized, it transformed itself again and again. And each transformation brought new questions. What does liberty look like in a capitalist system? How do you balance the rights of the individual with the good of the many? What happens when your freedom collides with someone else's? These weren't just political questions. They were spiritual, they were philosophical, and they still are. The Civil War tore the country in half. And it wasn't just about geography. It was about soul, about what the USA really was. Was it a land of human dignity or a system of economic power at any cost? Over 600,000 lives were lost to answer that question. And when the dust settled, slavery was abolished. But racism didn't vanish. Inequality didn't end. The USA took a step forward and the fight continued. In the 20th century, the USA emerged as a global superpower. But that came with a new identity crisis. It was no longer a scrappy young republic fighting for survival. It was now the biggest, loudest, richest, most influential force on the planet. And power, like always, changed everything. The philosophy of the USA had to evolve or rot. What do you do when the rebel becomes the empire? What happens when the defender of freedom begins building military bases around the world? When the champion of democracy starts toppling governments in the name of strategy? Here's where the contradiction deepens. The USA still preached liberty, still waved the flag of individual rights, still held up the Constitution as sacred. But on the streets of its cities, black citizens were still being segregated, brutalized, and lynched. Women were still being told they belonged in kitchens, not in power. Immigrants were welcomed for labor, but not for equality. And yet, even through this, something strange kept happening. People believed in the idea of the USA, not because it was perfect, but because the dream of freedom was bigger than its flaws. Because inside every injustice was the seed of its opposite. Because every time the USA betrayed its ideals, someone stood up to say, "This is not who we are." From Martin Luther King Jr. to Susan B. Anthony, from Malcolm X to Harvey Milk, voices rose up from within the system to call it out, to remind the country what it claimed to be, to hold it accountable not to foreign powers but to its own words. That's what makes the USA unique. It's not the land, it's not the power, it's not the wealth. It's the permission to question everything, even the nation itself. You are allowed, even encouraged, to criticize the government, culture, the president, the police, the past, because the soul of the USA is not obedience. It's resistance. It's questioning. It's the right to say, I disagree, and to be safe while saying it. But somewhere along the way, the philosophy of the USA began to shift, not officially, not with a vote, but silently in the background, through media, through marketing, through fear. And the question became, are we still free to think? Or are we just free to choose between products? Because when freedom becomes a market, the soul of a nation starts to forget who it is. The USA once asked, what is the good life? What does it mean to live well, to be just, to be virtuous? Now that question has been replaced by, how do I win? How do I stand out? How do I go viral? But the soul cannot thrive on winning alone. It needs meaning. It needs roots. It needs a moral center. Modern life in the USA is fast, loud, and always online. But speed isn't wisdom. Noise isn't knowledge. And being connected isn't the same as being whole. People are anxious, disconnected, overstimulated, numb. The old questions still haunt us. What am I doing here? What does it mean to be human? How do I live a life that actually matters? And those questions can't be answered by ads or influencers or algorithms. They require silence, depth, and courage. The USA doesn't need more content. It needs more conscience. It doesn't need more slogans. It needs more stillness. It doesn't need more followers. It needs more thinkers. But thinking is not enough, because thought without courage becomes a cage of its own. The founders of the USA didn't just think. They acted. They wrote. They risked. They bled, all for a vision they couldn't fully see, but refused to abandon. Today, the USA doesn't need more information. It needs clarity. It needs people who are willing to look directly into the storm and not flinch. Because the storm isn't outside us. It's within. It's in our apathy, in our endless consumption, in our quiet belief that nothing can really change. But that belief that nothing matters is the real enemy, because it numbs the soul, and a numbed soul forgets how to fight. This is how a nation forgets itself. Not in a war, not in a collapse, but in a quiet surrender to distraction. So what does it mean to wake up? It means remembering that freedom is not comfort. It's not safety. It's not even choice. It's the power to live aligned with truth, even when the truth is unpopular, even when it costs you something, even when it hurts. The soul of the USA was never about being the most powerful. It was about being the most free. And freedom, real freedom, requires friction. It requires disagreement. It requires responsibility. It requires the courage to stand in silence when the world is screaming for noise. Because in that silence, something ancient stirs, something the founders felt, something the early dreamers believed. The human being is not a product, not a cog, not a follower, but a soul. And that soul cannot be owned. Not by a king, not by a government, not by a corporation, not even by fear. That's the heart of the USA. Not the borders, not the flags, but the soul that refuses to be silenced. Even now, after all the noise, all the betrayal, all the forgetting, that soul is still there, waiting for people who will live awake, who will speak not because it's popular, but because it's true, who will remember that the real revolution isn't out there, it's in here, in the mind, in the heart, in the quiet decision to live with integrity when no one is watching. The illusion of freedom is easy. The performance of patriotism is easy, but the actual work of freeing your mind, of unlearning the lies, of standing alone, that's hard, but it's worth it. Because the story of the USA was never about perfection. It was always about progress. Not comfort, but conscience. Not dominance, but dignity. Not silence, but soul. The soul of the USA will not be saved by slogans. It will not be saved by elections. It will not be saved by branding. It will be saved by individuals. By people who choose meaning over comfort, truth over noise, soul over self-image. And that choice, that tiny internal revolution, is the most USA thing you can do. So the next time you feel lost, the next time the world feels fake, the next time you wonder what it all means, pause. And remember, you are the revolution. You are the conscience. You are the soul the USA was built to protect. It was never about the flag. It was about the flame, the one inside you, the one no one can take. So protect it, feed it, and let it burn. This is Philo Nest, and we're here to remember what they forgot.